So where do we start when we begin to think about a topic as broad and extensive as ecosystem restoration? Perhaps one of the best places to start is with Aldo Leopold, often considered the father of conservation here in the United States. We will be discussing Leopold's land ethic next week, but perhaps we can start here with this quote from Leopold's Ascent County Almanac. In my opinion, this quote probably describes why many of you are here. In reading from the almanac, Leopold wrote, "One of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. An ecologist must either harden his shell and make believe the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise." I am certain many of us are drawn to this field because we want to make ecosystems whole again, and we may feel that we are in a daunting situation, forever climbing uphill, or like Prometheus, destined to continually fight the same battles day after day and not making any progress. And it's pretty easy to feel this way. Just take a look at the United States as an example. We will talk more later in the semester about the pristine myth of the New World and the role that humans have in those ecosystems. But if we look at how Euro-Americans have influenced our landscape, we find some sobering statistics. While it was once said that a squirrel could travel from the Ohio River to the prairies of eastern Illinois without ever touching the ground, we have modified over 95% of our forests through harvesting, urban development, and if you pay attention to the western U.S. in particular, by actively suppressing wildfires over the last 60 to 80 years. It is estimated that we have also lost over half of our wetlands and have modified over 3/4 of our riparian areas across the United States. And don't even think about our native prairies that have been impacted heavily by agriculture and development. And in fact, many of the best remaining examples of pre-European prairie systems are actually in old pioneer cemeteries. However, before we go much farther, we should probably start with the definition of what we mean when we say ecosystem or ecological restoration. And not surprisingly, there are numerous definitions that have been promoted, but I think you will find that there are some common themes that each of these definitions address. One of the definitions that I prefer is provided by the Society for Ecological Restoration, or SER. In their primer on ecological restoration, published in 2004, they define restoration simply as the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. You'll note that I've highlighted the word process in red. This is because I think it is important to remember when we are thinking about restoration that it is a process, one that requires planning, understanding of the conditions on the ground, and specific activities to remedy past damage. And it doesn't end when you plant the last tree. It requires a long-term commitment to monitor your activities to make sure you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish. It also requires active engagement of your community, and we'll spend more time later in the semester discussing how best to do that. There are some other definitions you might run across as well, and each stresses some important points that I'd like to bring out and bring to your attention. The first listed here stresses the importance of restoring the structure and function of ecosystems. And another, promoted by Tony Bradshaw, a leading British ecologist who passed away in 2008, that described restoration as the acid test of our understanding of an ecosystem. We'll talk more about this next time, but take a minute and think about what that means, to be the acid test of our understanding of an ecosystem. We'll definitely come back to that in later lectures. We also need to consider what the difference is between restoration practice and restoration ecology. Believe it or not, this has been a fierce debate among restoration professionals for some time, one that SER addressed directly in its primer on ecological restoration in 2004. Here, SER defines ecosystem restoration as the practice of restoring ecosystems as performed by practitioners at specific project sites, whereas restoration ecology is the science upon which the practice is based. Restoration ecology ideally provides clear concepts, models, methodologies, and tools for practitioners in support of their practice. and sometimes the practitioner and the restoration ecologist are the same person. In this case, they are the nexus of practice and theory. The field of restoration ecology is not limited to just the direct service of restoration practice, however. Often, restoration ecologists advance ecological theory by using their restoration project sites as experimental areas where new techniques can be examined. For example, information derived from project sites could be useful in resolving questions pertaining to assembly rules of biotic communities. Further, restored ecosystems can serve as references for set-aside areas designated for nature conservation. The distinction regarding reference conditions is also an important concept we will tackle in the coming weeks. And while I don't want to get down in the weeds, so to speak, on this topic here at the very beginning of the class, I do want to provide you with something to think about that may be different from what you were expecting restoration to really be about. So let's think about the following quote from Don Falk, the former director of SER, who said, "Restoration uses the past not as a goal but as a reference point for the future. If we seek to recreate the temperate forests, the tallgrass savannas, or desert communities of centuries past, it is not to turn back the evolutionary clock, but to set it ticking again." Think about what this means. To me, it suggests that when we consider ecological restoration, we are not looking to recreate something that has already been. Rather, our goal should be to restore the ecosystem processes that promote certain ecosystem structures and functions that are characteristic of that ecosystem. Our goal is to set those critical ecosystem processes back in motion so the ecosystem can develop along a quote-unquote natural developmental trajectory. As a result, you'll often hear that restoration professionals have to be a master of all, understanding not only plant community dynamics, but also hydrology, geomorphology, geology, soil chemistry and ecology, and wildlife ecology, just to name a few. Your job as a restoration professional is to bring that knowledge together to assist in the recovery of a damaged or degraded ecosystem. So as we wrap up this introductory information, let's take a look at a short video produced by the U.S. Forest Service about how they approach restoration in the Pacific Southwest region in California. Pay particular attention to the breadth of experience and individual expertise being brought to bear to restore these expansive landscapes that includes not just plants and animals, but also large human communities.
I want people to understand that the service, I believe the service, the Forest Service, really does believe that ecological restoration holds the best path to prosperity of the people, the environment, this planet.
In terms of any single entity really in the state of California that has an opportunity or an obligation even, through restorative work and through progressive ecological management, I mean, we're the ones, right?
Ecological restoration is taking an ecosystem and making it more resilient to the kind of disturbances which inherently will occur.
It's assisting recovery of an ecosystem that's been damaged, degraded, or destroyed.
It's the returning of ecosystem components and processes back to functioning condition.
Well, ecological restoration is like not an event, it's a process.
A lot of the forests, particularly in the western United States, are not very healthy.
The landscape is so huge.
We manage nearly 20 million acres in California.
It's really going to be a whole host of things.
Fuels reduction projects, veg management projects, water projects,
Reforestation, meadow restoration, hydropower management.
Habitat restoration projects, monitoring wildlife.
Restoring what we would call function, restoring what we would call processes.
The Forest Service is going to attempt to help the ecosystems and our habitats respond to the disturbance regime.
And disturbance may be something such as wildfire,
Climate change,
Invasive species.
sudden oak death,
Flooding, landslides.
bark beetle attacks.
human population increases, and those kinds of things.
We have a big challenge ahead of us.
Probably the biggest challenge right now is that we have a diverse group of with stakeholders.
Resources are limited, budgets are tight, so we, by necessity, have to find ways to work better together.
This is a good time for everyone to work toward making these ecosystems more resilient.
It's more challenging now because we know that there's this global climate change occurring.
Big wild card. We don't know how that's going to play out.
And the more we work on trying to figure out how to restore the forest, the more we find that we have to be humble and realize how complex it is.
We can make a difference if we'll act, and act pretty quickly. The forest we help today will be the forest that we have tomorrow.
The way we've set up these public trust resources are to manage them for the American public for now and into the future.
We've all sort of inherited a sacred trust, and we're here for a short amount of time, and then we actually have the privilege of gifting that trust to a future generation.